So today our topic is actually re-estimating unfinished stories. Now, why is this an issue? There may be some concepts that if you're not aware of, I want to make sure that I make clear in terms of definitions so we're on the same page. Now, we do use a lot of terminology in the space. So when I say a story, I am really referring to a user story, okay? When I'm saying a user story, I am really talking about a requirement that is from the perspective of the user, okay? When I say a requirement, I'm really saying a statement of the need. That's all I'm really saying. So let me string that together for you again. When I say a story, I'm referring to a user story, which is one of the most popular ways of performing or doing requirements that actually exist within a space, right? When I refer to a user story, I'm referring to a requirement that is from the perspective of the user, okay? When I say a requirement, I'm really saying a statement of a need. That's it, right? Make sure that we're good to go. Now, these requirements, stories, user stories, whatever you want to call them, right? A lot of times the team that's doing the work will actually estimate it, right? Now, let's talk about estimation real quick. When I say estimation, I'm really saying that we're going to provide a guess of what we think is going to take to get that particular thing done. Now, those estimates could be done in hours, could be done in days, weeks, months, but you'll find that a lot of teams within the agile space use a thing called story points, right? And story points is just a relative measure of size being a combination of complexity, effort, and risk. So let me back that up and repeat it, right? So to make sure we're on the same page, right? So when it comes to a user story, we're classically going to estimate it. So hence the re-estimating part, right? So now when I say to estimate, I'm really saying this. Look, how long is it going to take to get it done? Okay? That can be measured in days, hours, minutes, weeks. You see a lot of teams will use something called a story point, which is just a relative measure of size being complexity, effort, and risk. Okay, those three things, right? Now, okay, great. So we got some definitions down, so we're on the same page, just in case anybody's a little bit more fresh to this, right? So now when you say a user story, or when you say what I'm saying here, re-estimating unfinished stories. We had a time box. We classically call that time box a sprint. There are other elements to the sprint. Same thing as an iteration. But we get to the end of the time box, and this particular requirement, this story, user story, did not get completed by the end of that sprint. So it is now unfinished. And hence the problem. Some teams or people in general always ask me the question. For those things that we did not finish, those stories that we did not complete in the sprint, should we re-estimate unfinished stories? Should we re-estimate unfinished requirements once that time box is over? Okay? Well, there are schools of thought on this, right? But the question I would ask, and you all tell me if this is a crazy question. If we didn't have a time box and you got to the end of the week and it's not done, do you re-estimate it every time you don't finish it? I mean, so literally when you get to the end of the time box, that's when people normally complain about we didn't finish it, so we want to deal with it. So the question becomes, what's the motivation for re-estimating? And for a lot of teams, the motivation has something to do with velocity. Velocity is average story points completed. Well, we talked about a story point being an estimate, right? A relative estimate at that. And so when we complete a sprint, we complete a certain amount of stories, and those stories have story points on them. And the total amount of story points completed averagely over several sprints is what we call velocity. So it's average story points completed. Now, you will hear people say the sprint's velocity, and that's fair. We always take terms and use them in multiple ways, right? But normally we're saying the average velocity. So a sprint velocity, I can understand what you mean by that, but some people can get it confused. If you only got one sprint, you're only averaging that one sprint, so that's your velocity, right? So some people will call out a sprint velocity. Some people will just call that story points completed, okay? So it's not confusing for me or for you right now as we're having this conversation. I'm just going to call it story points completed, and then I'm going to call velocity average story points completed, just to make sure that we're real clear on the definitions and we're on the same page, okay? So now I've gotten to the end of the sprint. We didn't get everything done. We didn't get a particular story done. So let's say we had one story of all of them, and this story was a 13-pointer. Let's make it easier. It's an 8-pointer, okay? It's 8 story points, right? And we get to the end of the sprint, and it's not done, okay? And it's not done. People are curious if you should re-estimate. Now, I have a certain philosophy or a certain way that I live life, and I would start off where I normally operate is no partial credit allowed. No partial credit allowed, okay? How I have to phrase it up in terms of people within, a class setting and just removing the thought of sports to the side, right? Because if you're playing basketball, you only get a point if it goes through the hoop. You understand? In football, you only get a point if you actively score in some kind of way, right? Not if you get 50% there, or halfway there, or 75% there, or 99% there, right? It doesn't matter. So realistically, for me, I'm of the camp that you should have no partial credit. Now, why am I of that camp? For one reason. The user gets no value out of partially completed things. They don't get any value out of something that's been partially completed. Hence the problem. So you could end up in a situation where you have a sprint full of things that are 50% done, and you're earning partial, and it looks like you have a velocity. So now I ask you a question. If you were the customer, would you want a bunch of stories that's 50% complete by the end of a time frame, or would you want only 50% of those stories 100% complete? If it was your money being spent, how would you want your money to be taken care of? Does that make sense? If you hear what I'm saying, do me a favor, right? Throw in the chat, I hear you. I hear you, right? Are you of the no partial credit camp? If you are, just type in the chat, no partial credit allowed for me, right? Because that's kind of where I stand at. That's what I train people to do. Now, I don't really train people to do that. If I'm coaching somebody, I kind of coach in that direction. Now, because I think you can do whatever you choose to do, right? Some people are going to be forced to do whatever it is that the organization needs them to do, and some people need to do it for other reasons. So, what I have found is that a lot of people are way more interested. They are way more interested in doing partial credit because it helps with velocity. Remember, average story points completed. So instead of getting a good old zero, a duck egg, instead of getting that goose egg right there, they're gonna get partial credit, which adds into their velocity, which means they keep an average that's a little bit higher. But if they focused on that velocity, the average story points completed, then things would just level out anyway. But sometimes you have management that wants to make sure you maintain and you do things a certain way. And that's okay. That's okay. I'm not telling you to go get yourself fired by, you just hit me. I said, don't go get fired because of story points. That makes no sense. I mean, if you really love it that much, I guess you can get fired anytime you choose to. But whatever you do, don't come and start asking me for no job because you decided to get yourself fired because you don't want to do what they told you to do. So anyway, for me, I'm literally no partial credit, right? Allowed. It's a unique place to be because when you start thinking to yourself, no partial credit allowed, that's a tough place. That's a tough place because that means you could be 99% done, but it ain't done. It ain't done. You get nothing for that, right? That's a tough place to be, right? And then when it comes to Scrum, the product owner can say, hey, you know what? That's not important anymore. We're going to work on something different than that, and you may never even finish it. So, it happens. Normally you finish it, right? Normally you actually finish it, right? So realistically, I understand the other argument. But what is the other argument? The other argument is to earn partial credit. So it's to be or not to be is the question, right? So that bigger statement is earning partial credit. I'm a project manager in some parts of my trade. And one of the things that I have realized is that when we are putting percentages complete on task, it's really hard to do because you really are guessing how far you think you're along the path, and we're not that good at that, right? And so you could say with this partial credit thing, you know what? I feel like we're 50% done of this 8-pointer, so let's go ahead and earn the 4 points of that 8. Knowing we're going to work on the next sprint and we'll earn the other 4 in the next sprint. You know what? I remember being a part of coaching clinics and having this question answered, at various conferences that I've been to. And you know what the problem is? I can't fight people on this one. I can't fight it, right? The only way I can fight it with people is to really think about them using their own money, right? Them literally using their own money. But I can't fight it. I stopped fighting it at this point, right? So if you want to earn partial credit, go right ahead. But guess what? You are training your team members to behave a certain way. It's like with no partial credits allowed, I am training them that no partial credits is allowed. That it is absolutely unacceptable to give something that's partially done to the customer. You probably not going to give it to the customer that's partially done anyway, right? You're probably not going to do that, right? You're really not going to do that. But the idea is the same. So when I think about earning partial credits, now you're training a team that earning partial credits is a good way to survive. And I find a lot of times teams want to earn partial credits because of the powers that be that exist, right? And some teams just want to do it because that's what they've been used to, or they just want to see that they've accomplished something along the way. But completing something is a good accomplishment, right? Having things 50% done or 70, whatever the number is, doesn't matter, right? So you can earn partial credit. Now, I'm okay with it. You're not on my team. I'm not going to fight you about it. I'm going to give you this simple debate and have a conversation with you about it. And then I'm going to try to partner with you so you can choose, right? And I'll give you my experience and I'll tell you what and what not what I would do. But, I don't really want to influence you. I'd rather for you to run an experiment, right? I've run an experiment of doing partial credit. And I just have found that it's led to, some crazy assumptions later on, right? It's led to things taking longer to get done. And the truth of the matter is, estimation is a non-value add but necessary activity. Let me back up. When I say non-value add but necessary, I'm saying on one side there is value add items, then there's non-value add but necessary items, and then there is waste. We get rid of waste, non-value add items but necessary. You want to do as little of that as possible so you can spend more time doing the value add stuff, right? So estimation is non-value add but necessary, right? You don't need to estimate to normally get something done. Okay, so the idea, is that you just run into a situation a lot of times when doing earning partial credit. And then if the direction changes, what do you do with those partials, right? And so, most complaints that I find from teams is the first one. It's going to be more accurate if we go ahead and re-estimate it. But again, if you had no time box, you wouldn't re-estimate an item that you're working on. And I get that things get bigger, but do we estimate things that get smaller? No, we don't usually estimate things that get smaller, right? So if you estimated something to be 8 points and it was a 3 point or 2 point or whatever, it was just smaller in general, you don't normally go back and say, let me go ahead and re-estimate that, right? So it's normally a very one-way thing that we do. And so people want to be more accurate, but only more accurate when it benefits them. Does that make sense? And so that's normally the biggest argument that I hear in relationship to it. The next one that happens is that they need to do something about it for the next sprint. They need it to help properly plan. They need it so they can take better actions in the next sprint. That is a very small argument that I hear. And for some people it makes them feel better. I guess the third argument, it just makes them feel better to feel like they've done a good job estimating. But estimation isn't delivery is the problem, right? It really isn't delivery. And really what you're looking for as a customer is you're looking for delivery. You're looking for having at least the ability to get feedback on something, right? At a minimum. So, I don't know, where you're at on it, right? But as I stated, my additional thoughts is really very simple. And I've stated to you already. You want to practice what you preach. You actually want to put or position teams to be able to benefit from the things that they do in the future. And at the end of the day, the behaviors that you train them for, like I do jujitsu, I do a jujitsu, and then I hopefully never have to use it for real. But we practice it still. And what you're doing is you're practicing a set of behaviors, whether you're doing partial credit or no credit at all. You're practicing a behavior that they're going to move forward with. And the question becomes, which behavior do you really want them to move forward with? That's the question, right? And so, have I earned partial credits before? Yes. No question. I've had situations where I don't want to be walked out the door and management expects for us to do partial credit, or we do partial credit because they want us to maintain an exact velocity. Like they want to have 50 points of velocity every single sprint. If you go down 1 point, they're upset about it, right? And I've seen myself, right, along with other team members, do things to make sure we make it work, make sure we maintain that 50, make sure we could look good to the powers that be, because otherwise the powers that be come and start bothering us in ways that we don't want them to. And then we spend more time talking to them about all these things that's bothering them instead of actually delivering work. So part of it is to get them off our back. So I have been in that situation before. I completely get it and I completely understand. And I think a lot of people that I run into, especially developers and especially tech leads, developers. When I say developer, I'm saying anyone that's working on any aspect of what it takes to build it, right? So a tester is a developer, IT people, okay? And at least in my world of thinking about them, right? It's just a generic term. Anyone that's working on any aspect of what it takes to build it. So literally, that's really our conversation, right? The question is, what are you gonna do? I mean, what have you been doing? I've seen that most people put no partial credit allowed. No partial credit allowed. I've seen that more from anybody else than anything else, right? But here's my question, right? What do you think is wrong with earning partial credits? What do you think is wrong, right? I mean, I get, the things that we talked about here. But what else is wrong with earning partial credits? If you're in a situation where you have people that don't understand and you're trying to educate them and that education is not working and you want to be in a position where you do want to be able to deliver. And one of the things that you have to do to be able to deliver is get management off your back because they don't quite understand. Most of us work in environments that are hybrid at best, right? That are hybrid at best, right? And in terms of being hybrid, you can end up in a situation where you're doing things that aren't by the book, but who says you have to be by the book anyway, right? You know, I'm kind of at this point in my life. I've been here a long time ago. I'm agnostic of method. You know, the frameworks. I'm really a framework agnostic to some degree, right? You know, I can't say, you know, one is perfect. Neither one of them is perfect, right? And so you do whatever you want to do. So some organizations, a hybrid is the best thing that they can do, and I'm okay with that, right? Now, does it mean they could do better? Yes, we can always do better. Even, you know, people that had the most perfect marriage on the planet can always make their marriage better, right? And I look at a lot of times these things as being a marriage, right? And the truth of the matter is, with me as a coach or a scrum master, anything like that, I'm not trying to be embedded forever. You know, I'm really not trying to be embedded forever. The true test of you as an organization is me walking away and you doing this yourself. You doing this yourself, right? And if you feel like the best thing you can do in terms of doing it yourself is to earn partial credits, then by all means, earn partial credits. Just as long as you're delivering. If you're delivering and earning partial credits, I'm not going to fight with you too much, right? Because is it really worth the battle, right? And then if I kind of give you some suggestions to change and it don't work, now you're complaining and looking at me all sideways. Like I done did something wrong to you and your family. And I ain't done nothing wrong to you but give you a little advice, right? Run an experiment, see how it works. If it works, it works. If it don't, it don't, right? So, all right, so that was our topic, right? We talked about both sides of it. Again, I'm squarely, and I have been this way for a long time, in all the experiments I've been running, and I've had 200-person portfolios. I normally go inside of large organizations, and in large organizations, there's a lot of teams, and a lot of times when I'm in there with a large organization, I find a way to run some experiments so I can test out some of these dumb ideas I have, like earning partial story points. And I didn't think it worked. I just didn't think it worked, not for a team in the long term. It just created things that was what a team wasn't focused in on delivering value for the user. But I also find it to be interesting because I find that in those experiments, most of the people that was doing or wanted to do partial story points were further and further away from the customer, further away from whoever the customer is, right? They were just further away from it. And the further they were away from it, more it ran into a problem. But again, you know, I told you all, I'm in a PhD program. I'm trying to figure out what my dissertation is going to be in a few years. So maybe this will be a topic or something like that. On that note, I think we're good.